Hi, my name is Diane. I'm Pam Keddie's sister, and I'd like to recite the eulogy that I read yesterday at her Celebration of Life party. This is a tribute to her wonderfully full life. Thanks for the countless calls, texts, cards, flowers, plants, and food that we received during these difficult weeks. Please consider yourself lucky that Pam touched your life and remember all the memories you have. To begin with, Pam didn't like to see people cry or upset, so there'll be no crying because this is a party and Pam loved to party. This past October, we celebrated Pam's 50th at my home. Originally, she was refusing any party, but then agreed to a small family gathering. When all the guests had left, she said this was the best birthday ever, and that is a moment I'll never forget. Pam was born in 1966. She wasn't diagnosed for a couple of years, but the doctors weren't optimistic about her future. They said she wouldn't live past a year, and that if she did, she'd never walk or talk. At age 2 to 3, she was diagnosed with PWS or Prader-Willi syndrome. So although her passing at age 50 was too young, she certainly beat the odds. She began saying words at age 3 and began walking at age 4 at 50 pounds. Does anyone know what Pam's favorite thing in life was?
Food.
Bingo. Pam lived with Mom and Dad for 29 years and 2 months. In 1995 December, just before Christmas, she was admitted to the hospital. She was in respiratory failure due to morbid obesity. We thought we would lose her then. Her weight was 389 pounds. On New Year's Eve in her hospital room, we shared a champagne toast, including Pam, unsure if she would live to see 1996. At the start of 96, her condition gradually improved, and towards January's end, she was transferred to Spaulding Rehab in Boston. There we met Dr. Robert Wharton, a pediatrician with a special love and interest of children and adults with PWS, and under his care and guidance, she continued to improve. It was he that presented the idea of the Gilbo Centers, now known as the Latham Centers, on Cape Cod. They had several group homes for children and adults with PWS. Being a nurse, it was decided at that time that I would become Pam's co-guardian with my mom. And this began the process of Pam's transition from home in Dracut with Mom and Dad to a group home with other PWS residents on Cape Cod. On a day passed from Spaulding, Pam and I rode down to Yarmouth to Gilbo. We were invited for lunch and a tour of the center. We were greeted by an adoring staff and about 25 PWS young adults. They were of various ages, shapes, and sizes, but the majority of the residents were of an average weight. After a lunch consisting of 2 rice cakes, a yogurt, and cucumber slices, and a tour, we headed back to Boston. During our ride back, we talked about our visit. Pam was impressed with not 1, but 2 rice cakes. On our ride, I asked Pam if she could recognize a similarity common to all of the residents at the program. She was stumped. She tried, but she couldn't come up with an answer. I told Pam that everyone there had Prader-Willi. "No way," Pam said. Prior to our visit, I had been talking up the idea of the Cape. We spoke about being an adult, being responsible, being healthy, and being independent. And by the time we made it back to Spaulding, Pam had decided that she wanted to go to one of the group homes at Gilbo. During her 5-month stay at Spaulding, she'd been on a strict calorie reduction diet and been participating in physical and occupational therapy. At this point, she was still dependent on oxygen, but she was losing weight. At the end of May 1996, she was discharged. Her new address would be 38 Headwater Street in West Yarmouth, Massachusetts. In her 29 years at home, she had a great foundation. There was never a lack of love for her. She acquired some special traits from both Mom and Dad. She was Dad's favorite. He brought her everywhere. He gave her his sense of humor, and from my mom, she learned to be kind and generous. They loved that blonde daughter to the moon and back. That hospitalization at St. John's in December of 95 saved her life, I believe, and it was a new beginning for her. It's what allowed us all to have her for these past 20 years. The early home visits from the Cape were tough. The expression, "it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks," comes to mind. There were 3 old dogs, Mom, Dad, and Pam, 2 who loved to feed her and 1 who loved to eat. But as my sister Debbie pointed out, a satisfied Pam was a happy Pam. Many times early on, she would gain 15 to 20 pounds on a weekend home visit. During these 20 years with Latham, she unfortunately wasn't free from hospitalizations, surgeries, and close calls with death. My mom and I called her the cat with 9 lives. Sadly, on March 8th, our little kitten ran out of lives, and although it's sad and final, she is at peace. Her death came fast, and she did not suffer. She'll be remembered by so many things: her smile, her laugh, her phone messages, her excellent hugs, and her generosity. And my sister Debbie and I both married into families that opened up their arms not only to Pam, but to all of us Keddies, and we're so grateful for the Melanson and Harringtons' love and acceptance. She had a memory like no other. If you promised her something, a baseball cap, an ice cream cone, or a ride in your car even 5 years prior, the next time she saw you, she would call you out on your promise. She had a super sense of humor, and she loved pranks, and she loved to shop. This Christmas, she spent the majority of the money on Pam rather than gifts for others, and unlike Mom or her sisters, she wasn't a bargain hunter. She got herself a new jacket, new PJs, new boots, and several new Mandela adult coloring books. The result was that Gwen had to do her shopping, and that was a first for Pam, ironically. On February 11th, Pam called me to tell me she'd started her Christmas shopping for this year. She'd gotten a Dunkin' Donuts thermos for Kyle. Of course, a very talented artisan, any and all arts and crafts was her thing. Afghans, latch hooks, ceramics, puzzles, coloring, painting, building model cars, crossword, word search, and photography. She was the master of it all. And she was a Hallmark, happily ever after addict, just like Nana Melanson. Many times she'd have fallen asleep on the couch while crocheting, and we'd be sucked into the silly Hallmark movies. She loved animals, especially cats and dogs, and she loved babies and children. She was drawn to them like a magnet. She loved to hold babies, and when someone was expecting a baby, she'd crochet baby blankets and sweaters and hats and booties. There were never any patterns to follow. She just made it up as she went. And she adored her nieces and nephews and loved to spoil them. For the many crochet projects she did, she tore out almost the same amount. She would mess up and start over again right from the start on countless occasions. She loved music, singing, and dancing, and she loved the hit tunes that made it to the radio, like the catchy choruses like Band on the Run, Ricky Don't Lose That Number, Who Let the Dogs Out, Billie Jean, Pumped Up Kicks, and anything country. And she loved to play a game of picking favorites. One of her favorite cousins, John Janulis, was the top dog. She always wanted him for the Christmas Yankee swap. When Mike Crowley came into my cousin Donna's life, I understand Pam initially wasn't too keen on choosing him for the Yankee swap. In fact, she threw a little tantrum. Funny enough, the John and Mike rivalry was born, who would be Pam's favorite. And she did the same with her brother-in-laws, David and Jim. But I think David was known as the favorite brother-in-law, and Jim was known as the other favorite brother-in-law. And she had a special love for her godparents, Aunt Eva and Uncle Joe Spinazzola. And her favorite was Eva's rice pudding and rides on Uncle Joe's Sea-Doo on Newfound Lake. Now let's talk about little Pam, childhood Pam. And looking through all of her photos, she was absolutely adorable. Light blonde hair, big blue eyes, and always smiling. When she started eating, my parents were thrilled. At age 2.5, she began to get a little chubby, and at that time she was really fun to play with. Then, around age 6, she started to become a chubby little special needs girl with a very big temper. There were outbursts and tantrums if things didn't go her way. In the fall of 1973, we were at the same elementary school, the Greenmont Avenue. My Aunt Jane Keddie was the vice principal, and I was in the 4th grade. 3 doors to my left was Aunt Jane's class, and 3 doors to my right was the special education room, Pam's classroom. So my sister was the little short fat one who everybody in the school knew. She was the only one with PWS, and usually she was super friendly, saying hi to everyone, yet I can also remember hearing her from my classroom. Pam was having a fit over something, and one by one I'd hear each classroom door close. My dad, Kenny the plumber, was a hard-working guy. He worked his union job Monday through Friday, and every Saturday he did side jobs in people's homes. And almost every Saturday Pam would accompany the plumber. She'd bring her coloring books, her puzzle books, toys, and usually 2, maybe 3 or 4 bags along with her. And as the plumber worked, she'd hang out and do her coloring, play with the kids at the home, and of course eat. And when unattended, those bags of hers were the absolute perfect spot to hide food that she'd pocketed from that kitchen. Little Pam developed early on a very valuable life skill. It was called the art of obtaining food. She was cunning and she was crafty. My mom would say Pam could talk a dog off a meat wagon, and she was right. So whether taking a walk in the neighborhood, visiting neighbors, having a snack or two, for some reason, despite her size, everyone loved to feed her, and Pam didn't have a problem with that. Once when my mom was away overnight, Dad was in charge, but he was napping. Pam decided to take Debbie, who was about 2 at the time, for a walk up to Richardson's ice cream stand. Maybe she thought she could talk them into some free ice cream. They had to cross a main road to get there. In high school, the special needs adolescent did typical teenage things to be cool, like stealing my mom's cigarettes and smoking in the bathroom, or the time she got suspended for drinking a beer in the cafeteria. She'd seen the movie E.T. and wanted to be like E.T., so she took a can of my dad's beer and wrapped it in tinfoil and packed it in her lunch. She proudly boasted at the lunch table that she was drinking beer like E.T. She was brought to see the principal and suspended. No alcohol on school grounds. The phone calls my mom received you couldn't make up. Mrs. Keddie, Pam was eating hot dogs from the trash. Mrs. Keddie, Pam slid down in the bus and she stuck under the seat. That was the time she was pretending that she was Mork from Mork. She put her hands over her head and just slid down. The Dracut Fire Department knew Pam well. Pam, I believe, originated I've Fallen and I Can't Get Up, about 20 years before the ad on television with the little old lady. But in addition to falling in a lot of awkward places and spaces, she used her weight to get her way. If she didn't want to move, who was going to pick up a 250-pound kid, right? Once at her day program, they went out into the community and she was caught stealing a pack of gum. Mrs. Keddie, Pam stole a pack of gum. Is it okay if we bring her to the police station? Or the time that she brought $350 cash to school. My dad had collected rent from one of his tenants, and Pam pocketed the money. Mrs. Keddie, did you know that Pam has $350? And my sister Pam was so generous. I think she enjoyed giving even more than she liked receiving. Once she called to try to adopt a starving child when she saw the commercial on TV. And Pam loved to fish. One of the times, Dad took her out on the deep sea fishing, and the seas were really rough that day. Pam told all the others on the boat that they would be seasick that day. And sure enough, while the entire boat was heaving into the Atlantic, Pam continued to fish proudly. She was a Special Olympian. She preferred to compete alone. She didn't like to lose, and second and third place weren't acceptable either. So you see, racing alone always yielded a first place gold medal. That was my sister Pam. When Pam turned 21, she couldn't wait to get her ID. So we went to the registry and got it, and then we went out for a drink. Frozen mudslide was her favorite drink, of course at 870 calories and 27 grams of fat. Way to go, Pam. A few years later, Debbie had a brilliant idea. She tried to buy booze with Pam's ID. Now, Pam was 4'6", Debbie was 5'2". Pam was obese, blonde hair, blue eyes. Debbie was thin, had big 80s brunette hair, and hazel eyes. The clerk slid the ID across the counter and told Debbie to get the hell out of the store. Pam thought that was hilarious. And Pam had a pet name for her favorite brother-in-law, Dave. Christopher is his middle name, so she would say, "Christopher, can you put on the Hallmark Channel?" And I know David will miss that. When we sorted through all of the pictures of Pam, we had the under 5 years pile, the under 18 years pile, and then the pre-Cape and the post-Cape pile. And the post-Cape pile is the time I'd like to talk about right now. Going to Latham, living semi-independently, Pam transitioned into adulthood. Although she was 29 and a half prior to her move, she was still a child to us. When she moved, a transformation began. Big Pam began to shrink, slowly. Young, belligerent Pam began to mature, slowly. And artistic, fun Pam began to grow, because she could. And her home became Cape Cod. Dracut, Tingsboro, Bristol, New Hampshire, and Chelmsford became places she visited. And after 2 nights' stay, she was ready to go home, back to Cape Cod. The relationship between Pam and I grew stronger after moving to the Cape. I became like a parent in a sense. Many decisions were made by me. About 4 years ago, after repeated hospitalizations with small bowel obstructions, I insisted on changing her to a ground diet, and her hospitalizations did diminish. I would then make her plates of food at parties when she came home, and then Pam insisted that I also make Dad's plate of food at parties, because like Pam, he couldn't control himself. She recognized my involvement with her health and happiness, and she loved the many sleepovers at my home. I always made her take a walk with me after dinner to walk the dog, and she never once complained or said no. We would bundle up and head out. She rarely challenged me, because she knew with me she wouldn't win. At the end of this past summer, she was in Chelmsford sleeping over. Dave suggested chicken, potatoes, and green beans for supper, and Pam said, "That sounds good." And then when Dave left the room, I told Pam that I felt like a lobster roll from D'Angelo's. Ooh, ooh, she said. I said, well, we'll have to get a small, and we'll have to grind your lobster meat, and we can split a bag of chips, and then your dessert will be a diet Jell-O. All right, yeah, that sounds good. When Dave came back, she boasted, Christopher, Di and I are not going to have chicken tonight. We're going to pick us up some lobster rolls. And that we did. I recently learned that one day when Elena was taking Pam to what I thought was Michael's to get crafts, they really went to McDonald's to get a McFlurry. I think Pam appreciated her family and was more grateful of all of us after moving away from us. Although my mom continued to get a phone call from Pam almost every day, and I know that she already misses that. She would call me too a lot, but usually to tell me secrets. I broke my glasses, I flushed my partial plate down the toilet, or I bought me a new Bruins jacket for $60. And I said, Pam, you don't even like the Bruins. And she said, no, I do. But she always would tell me not to tell Mom because she didn't want to upset Mom or disappoint her. And at the Cape, she loved her case management days. That would be when she would go out with her case manager and have alone time to go out for coffee, do errands, and go shopping. She loved the Cape Cod Mall, Barnes & Noble, and Kmart, and she always spoke about Krista K's frozen yogurt. A few years ago, Pam moved into a new group home at Latham, 153 Run Pond Road in South Yarmouth. Her housemates, Alan, Jenny, Mark, and Lois, all made it to her party. And at her house, she was the queen bee. Her chair in the dining room faced the kitchen, and so did her chair in the living room. Pam probably thought of these seats as premier seating. That way she wouldn't miss a trick. She enjoyed dancing to Chicken Fried and Pink Floyd, We Don't Need No Education, and she loved country. And when Debbie and Lonnie, staff at her home, went to see Zach Brown, they bought Pam back a poster. I would like to send out some huge hugs and thanks to all of you who brought food to our party to celebrate Pam's life. I'd also like to thank my friend Heidi Lloyd, who did beautiful invitations and memorial cards, and another thanks to my cousin Lisa for making this amazing video, such a special tribute to Pam's life. And another special thank you to my friend Diane for creating the beautiful fresh flower centerpieces. Over the last 20 years at Latham, she met so many wonderful, caring, loving staff members. Myself and my entire family can never thank you enough or express the respect and gratitude we have for each and every one of you for being her other family. Thank you.